Gracias. Listo.
A ver, hola, por favor.
Hola, hola, ¿sí? ¿Más fuerte? Ok, ¿así? ¿Así o más fuerte?
Más fuerte.
¿Más? Ok, como si estuvieras, ok, vale. ¿Esta agua?
Está bien, igual está bien.
¿Sí, está bien? Vale, gracias. Gracias. Listo.
A ver, hola, por favor.
Okay, so hello, my name is Fernando Bravo, and I'm going to introduce the first session here in La Plata. The title is Emotion, and we have 3 talks. We apologize in advance because the first author misunderstood the rules. So the first talk is going to be in Spanish, so we're going to challenge your Spanish skills. And then everything will go in English. So the first talk is by Laura Molina. The title is Music Rituals and Words of Sense.
Gracias. Bueno, este no es un estudio de cognición musical, sino de musicología empírica, con anclajes en la psicología de la música, la semiótica musical y la etnomusicología. Busca profundizar en el concepto propuesto por Óscar Hernández de mundo de sentido, que es una experiencia multimodal en la que coinciden los contenidos de diferentes lenguajes significantes, produciendo una respuesta de mayor intensidad emocional de los sujetos inmersos en esta, además de delimitar sus posibilidades de acción. Para evaluar si los rituales religiosos pueden funcionar como mundos de sentido, Se adoptó un abordaje transdisciplinar que ofreció información sobre la naturaleza y contenido de los materiales significantes, la respuesta emocional de los sujetos y el contexto de cada una de las instituciones religiosas escogidas. La iglesia de San Alfonso María de Ligorio, la mezquita Estambul y la iglesia Pentecostal Unida de Colombia, todas en Bogotá. En primer lugar, se hicieron entrevistas con los líderes de cada institución. También se aplicaron cuestionarios antes y después de cada ritual a varios feligreses. Posteriormente, se seleccionaron 3 sujetos por ritual para hacer entrevistas en profundidad y realizar una medición electroencefalográfica en el marco de un ritual real. Aquí se trabajó con un enfoque dimensional que evaluó la valencia y la actividad de las respuestas emocionales según el modelo circuncomplejo de Russell. Para realizar la conversión de las señales electroencefalográficas a indicadores de valencia de actividad, contamos con la participación de un neuropsicólogo, Juan Daniel Hernández, proceso en el que no nos compete profundizar en este momento. Posteriormente se hizo un análisis del material significante, los elementos musicales, sonoros, visuales y kinestésicos a lo largo del ritual, y se contrastó con la respuesta emocional de los sujetos con base en la selección de 23 momentos clave del ritual, 24 en el caso de la mezquita. A pesar de que existe una gran cantidad de factores que pueden influenciar la respuesta emocional, como las expectativas y vivencias particulares de los sujetos, la relación que tiene con el rito al que asiste y su vida espiritual en general, estos son factores imposibles de valorar en una investigación como esta. Sin embargo, fue posible identificar momentos puntuales en los cuales el entorno de la experiencia con sus materiales significantes fue determinante para facilitar una cierta respuesta emocional por parte de los feligreses. Por razones de tiempo no podemos incluir aquí una descripción detallada, pero el análisis tuvo en cuenta elementos visuales, arquitectónicos, condiciones acústicas, etc., como materiales significantes. A continuación mencionaré un momento relevante por cada ritual. La iglesia de San Alfonso. El momento de las peticiones después de los gozos al Señor de los Milagros. Al ser los gozos el momento central de esta misa de peregrinación, se esperaría que fueran un disparador de emociones religiosas. Sin embargo, los materiales significantes sonoros no apoyan la relevancia de este momento, ya que sucedió después de una homilía relativamente larga y hubo un alto grado de reverberación. Adicionalmente, la cualidad positiva del discurso verbal del sacerdote, que invitaba a la alabanza al Señor de los Milagros, contrastó con el tono plano del discurso. A pesar de esta contradicción entre modos a lo largo de los gozos, al culminar esta sección, cuando los sujetos hicieron sus peticiones en silencio, fue uno de los momentos de mayor refuerzo multimodal de la misa. Como se puede observar en los gráficos, que muestran en su eje horizontal los momentos seleccionados y en los ejes verticales las valencias y actividades correspondientes, en el momento 14, las respuestas emocionales de los 3 sujetos, que están representadas cada una con una línea de color diferente, fueron similares en cuanto a actividad. La valencia, sin embargo, fue distinta. Esto ocurrió después de la repetición de los gozos intercalada con la parte hablada, que generó un patrón repetitivo y rutinario. El contraste de ese patrón musical con el silencio siguiente contribuyó a la eficacia emocional de este instante. Mezquita Estambul. El momento escogido sucedió después del ICAM, cuando el imam recitó las palabras Ida sulsilati al-ardu silsalaha, que significa cuando sea sacudida la tierra por su terremoto. Esta frase, a diferencia de otras recitaciones que tienen un comportamiento melismático, fue predominantemente silábica, lo que sugiere una mayor facilidad para entender el significado verbal. Teniendo en cuenta que los 3 sujetos conocen la lengua árabe, la comprensión semántica es un elemento que justifica sus correspondencias en respuestas emocionales. Como se puede observar en el gráfico, en el momento 11, todas las valencias descienden, llegando incluso al pico más bajo en uno de los fieles. Y todas las actividades ascienden, alcanzando uno de los picos más altos de toda la medición en 2 de ellos. En cuanto a la disposición corporal, en este momento los sujetos tenían las manos recogidas sobre sus brazos. El contenido verbal, sumado a la disposición corporal y a la expresividad de la recitación, permiten decir que este es un momento de refuerzo multimodal. Y PUC. En el momento escogido fue la cadencia de este bloque de canciones. Bueno, es el segundo bloque de canciones, que estaba conformado por 4 canciones. Todas fueron interpretadas en si menor, con un pulso de 147 pulsaciones por minuto. Las letras buscaban exaltar el poder y la majestad de Dios. El pulso rápido, las letras contundentes, los cortes de batería fuertes y repetidos y la presencia reiterada de dominantes en finales de frase junto con el énfasis a la relativa mayor crearon una atmósfera de mucha fuerza. La cadencia final, muy adornada por la batería, ocurrió después de 13 minutos seguidos de música, lo que explicaría la intensidad de la respuesta emocional de los sujetos. En este punto, varios modos de lenguaje reforzaron la idea de final y de liberación de energía. En la cadencia, las manifestaciones corporales fueron llantos descontrolados, temblores en las manos, brazos estirados hacia el cielo y terminó con un aplauso que duró más de 1 minuto. No te preocupes. Espera. Aquí. Ya. Como se ve en el momento 12, los 3 sujetos coinciden en un nivel alto de actividad, pero no hay un comportamiento similar en la valencia. Esto puede deberse a que la intensidad de la experiencia emocional puede estar acompañada por sentimientos contradictorios como culpa, arrepentimiento, felicidad, etc., que dependen de la vivencia particular de cada sujeto. Pero es evidente que la música en combinación con otros elementos significantes del entorno funciona aquí como una facilitadora de entrega corporal y emocional casi total al ritual. Los efectos emocionales que produce la música han sido estudiados principalmente en condiciones experimentales controladas que sugieren relaciones 1 a 1 entre estructuras musicales y emociones. Este estudio, que se llevó a cabo en un entorno complejo, demuestra que es mucho más relevante estudiar la organización de los elementos musicales en una sintaxis. Asimismo, es importante tener en cuenta 2 elementos que están normalmente ausentes de otros estudios: la predictibilidad y la combinación de la música con otros modos expresivos. Para entender el nivel de predictibilidad de cada ritual, tomamos en cuenta 3 factores: la familiaridad con la estructura del ritual, la familiaridad con los materiales musicales y la codificación de los movimientos corporales. En cuanto al primer factor, encontramos que a mayor familiaridad con la estructura del ritual, parece que los elementos musicales, el movimiento corporal y otros estímulos tienen un menor peso en la respuesta emocional de los sujetos, que está más influenciada por el contexto interno de los feligreses. Mientras que la misa y la salat musulmana cuentan con secciones ordenadas y codificadas, el culto de la IPUC no tiene una estructura predecible. Sin embargo, en este ritual se dieron las respuestas emocionales más intensas y coordinadas entre los sujetos estudiados. Esto puede deberse a la importancia del segundo factor de predictibilidad, la familiaridad con los materiales que van apareciendo a través del ritual. Estos funcionan como claves que permiten construir la predictibilidad y conducen en gran medida a la sintaxis emocional del ritual. Esta sintaxis emocional es construida a través de los materiales sonoros que aparecen de manera sostenida y gradual a lo largo del tiempo. Por su parte, los asistentes a la mezquita, los materiales significantes resultan familiares. En la iglesia de San Alfonso hay un ligero margen de variación en los materiales musicales. Sin embargo, en estos 2 últimos rituales, los fragmentos musicales son cortos y dispersos en el tiempo. Entonces, la sintaxis emocional no se da exclusivamente desde la música, sino que obedece más a la estructura, como se mencionó anteriormente. Finalmente, en cuanto al nivel de codificación de los movimientos corporales, el ritual musulmán, seguido por el ritual católico, presentan los más altos grados de codificación. En la IPUC, por el contrario, las respuestas corporales no están codificadas. Esto genera una ilusión de mayor libertad que en los demás rituales. Sin embargo, cuando indagamos en las entrevistas por los comportamientos de los feligreses más allá del ritual, fueron los asistentes a la IPUC quienes manifestaron el mayor grado de obediencia a los mandatos propuestos por la Iglesia fuera de esta. De lo anterior se podría concluir que una mayor sensación de libertad dentro del ritual está correlacionada con una mayor obediencia por fuera de este. En cuanto a la jerarquía de modos que se presentan los rituales, mientras en la IPUC lo sonoro tiene un papel central, en la mezquita la medición nos permitió identificar que el discurso verbal es preponderante en la construcción de la sintaxis emocional. Algo similar sucede en el ritual católico, aunque en este caso fue menos evidente la primacía de un modo sobre otro. En síntesis, de los 3 rituales señalados, el ritual de la IPUC es el que presenta un mayor refuerzo entre modos y una mayor intensidad de la respuesta emocional, lo que demuestra su cercanía con el concepto de mundo de sentido. Esto se debe en gran medida a la organización de los materiales sonoros en una sintaxis que facilita transiciones de calma, activación y catarsis. También se debe a que la menor predictibilidad del rito le da más peso a la experiencia de los contenidos del entorno. Pero más interesante aún es verificar que la sensación de libertad de los asistentes de la IPUC dentro del ritual está correlacionada con una mayor obediencia a los comportamientos esperados por la Iglesia por fuera del mismo. Gracias. por la iglesia por fuera del mismo. Gracias. Gracias.
Okay, so we start with questions here in La Plata. So who wants to ask Laura any question? Can be in English or Spanish, I can translate, yeah.
Dadas por la iglesia por fuera del mismo.
Muchas gracias, felicitaciones por la presentación, fue muy interesante. La pregunta es, la escala de activación emocional basada en el electroencefalograma, ¿en qué consiste exactamente?
¿Respondo?
So the question is about the activation scale of the EEG.
Ok, listo. Realmente ahí nos basamos en una teoría que es la teoría de Russell, que habla de valencia y de actividad. La actividad tiene que ver con actividad cerebral. Realmente nosotros no hicimos esa parte del estudio, esa parte la hizo un neuropsicólogo que se llama Juan Daniel Hernández. Nosotros hicimos más la parte de la etnografía y podría pasarle si quiere bibliografía acerca del tema, pero sí. ¿Está bien? Vale, aquí está, mira, ahí está. La actividad, la segunda referencia es.
Okay, so we do we have any question from Montreal? Could be even in Spanish.
No question from Montreal.
So here, do we have any other question? Bueno, yo te hago una pregunta. ¿Encontraron algún tipo especial de características que de algún modo unifiquen el comportamiento en términos de valencia y actividad en la mayoría de las personas? ¿Hay algún tipo específico de estructura musical que te parezca o que les parezca que hace que en general los participantes se unan en esos aspectos?
Precisamente lo que encontramos es que no hay un elemento en particular aislado que pueda lograr conducir la respuesta emocional de los individuos, sino que es una construcción a través del tiempo y como una curva de elementos que hacen que las personas tengan esa respuesta emocional. No es solo un elemento concreto.
Es una combinación.
Ajá, es una combinación que se desarrolla en el tiempo.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Okay, so I think we could, if we don't have any other question, can we move to the next participant? Yeah.
5 minutes to change the
Okay, so we have some minutes to change, and then we'll start with the second one. That's given by Julián Cespedes-Guevara, and the title is A Constructionist Theory of Emotional Contagion. say something? Okay. This is perfect. Okay, thank you very much. So remember that the discussion is via Zoom and not via YouTube.
Sorry, no problem.
So you have to mute
Yep.
YouTube
Yep.
during the discussion. Okay?
Mhm.
Something?
No problem.
This is perfect. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm gonna try. Oh, okay, right, cool.
So I present Julián again. So Julián Cespedes-Guevara is going to talk about a constructionist theory of emotional contagion.
Thank you, Fernando. Okay, so thank you everyone. I'm gonna try to summarize this theory very quickly. So, what is emotional contagion with music? It's the experience of listening to a piece of music and then perceiving that the music expresses an emotion. For example, this man perceives that the music he's listening to is sad, and then somehow he becomes sad himself, as if he were infected by the emotion he perceives in music. And people like Jusselin and Westphal in their Breck-Wema theory have proposed that the mechanism that underlies this phenomenon is an internal mirroring of basic emotions expressed by music. Some assumptions behind this theory the main one is that there's a shared acoustic code that underlies music and speech prosody expression of emotions, and that this code is organized into 5 basic emotions: joy, fear, anger, sadness, and tenderness. Basic emotions, according to the classic theory, have distinct vocal and facial expression, and therefore they are expressed and recognized cross-culturally. Everyone in the world across cultures would recognize and express these 5 emotions equally and easily, readily. They would develop and start to show early in development. Children would recognize them and express them from a very early age. And they also would have distinct brain and physiological circuits and responses. However, there's little or conflicting evidence for many of these claims. For example, for the claim that there are distinct physiological responses and neural circuits associated with discrete emotions, or that there's also recent accumulating evidence that it's not so true as we have assumed for so many decades about the people can recognize and express emotions across cultures the same way. There's also evidence that children learn to recognize emotions and that this takes them several years, even through early adolescence. And crucially, for the case of music, there's little evidence that there are distinct vocal expressions for basic emotions. That prosody, speech prosody, conveys mainly arousal, not discrete emotions. And that mimicking gestures and vocalizations, etc., leads to changes in the observer's valence, not to the induction of discrete emotions. In the case of music, there's evidence that the physiological responses to music are associated with the music arousal level or activity level, not to discrete emotions. There's also conflicting evidence about the claim that non-Western listeners perceive discrete emotions in music. What is very clear is that they can perceive musical arousal, but discrete emotions, that's more debatable. There's also evidence that children learn to distinguish between several musical emotions by age 6 or 8, by the time they become sensitive to mode, which is crucial, distinguishing positive and negative emotions, for example, in music. There's also evidence that several music emotion acoustic cues do not coincide with their equivalent on speech prosody. And that speech prosody and music acoustic cues, if you try to fit them into a basic emotions model, that doesn't match very well. But if you try to fit them into a dimensional model made of arousal and valence, it fits better. So I invite you to read a recent paper I published with Thomas Arola for a detailed review of this evidence. So the conclusion so far is that even though perceiving and expressing musical emotions may be based on a shared code and a biological code, this code is not organized around discrete emotional categories. It's organized around arousal and to some extent around valence. However, people do perceive discrete emotions in music when they listen to music, and they do report becoming infected by emotions when they perceive music, the phenomenon of emotional contagion. So where does this leave us? How do we explain this? My proposal is that rather than thinking there's an emotion in music and then we become infected by mimicking it or mirroring it, I adopted the principles of a constructionist theory to explain this phenomenon. The principles are that emotion categories are not in the music materials, they are in people's minds. That therefore, emotion that we perceive in music, when we perceive in music, emotions in music, we attribute them to music rather than detect them or extract them, as it were. And their induced emotions are an interaction or emerge from an interaction of bottom-up perceptual processes and top-down cognitive ones. And that contextual cues are crucial disambiguating emotional expressions. I based this proposal on Lisa Feldman-Barrett's conceptual act theory of emotions, according to which emotions emerge when we perceive physical sensations in ourselves or in another, or in this case, in music, and then this creates variations in arousal and valence, right? We detect the activation and the valence of ourselves or of the other person, and we link these, we associate these variations with past knowledge, emotional knowledge. That's what creates an emotional act, a conceptual act, which creates emotional experiences such as perceiving emotion or having an emotion ourselves. So the bottom-up perceptual mechanisms in the case of music, the first one I propose is a sort of bodily tuning to the music stimulation level. So the more active the music is, the more our physiological response tends to heighten and vice versa. The expectation mechanism, or musical expectancy mechanism, which consists of a prediction of how the music is going to unfold. And when it doesn't coincide with our prediction, that produces changes in physiological and perceived arousal. And that our perception of consonance and dissonance in the music, our perception of mode, of major or minor mode, and our perception of harmonic complexity are associated basically with perceiving and experiencing musical valence, that the music expresses goodness or badness, and that we ourselves are feeling good or bad, pleasure or displeasure. This is arousal and valence is called in Barrett's theory core affect, these two dimensions. And these mechanisms interact, become associated, producing the conceptual act with these top-down, more conceptual, more cognitive mechanisms, such as the way we build prototype categories by building, averaging exemplars and creating prototypes, by using the same words to call, to name the same emotional categories. And by recalling, by bringing back semantic memories, by the role of narratives, such as the music lyrics or the videos, or, for example, in our last presentation, the content of the Mass, for example, in a religious ritual. The response formats that we ask our participants to fill in our experiments, and of course the cultural meaning of the situation. When these mechanisms interact with our perception of arousal and valence, then we have discrete emotions, perceived and induced. And this also interacts with attention, the attention modality of the listener, and the personal relevance that the music and the situation has for the listener. So the implications of this proposal is that it makes much more emphasis on variability, because it doesn't assume that emotion is in the music and then we mirror it. Then it can explain better why sometimes we have the same emotion we perceive and sometimes we don't. If there is a room for mirroring, then it would be a mirroring of contextualized emotions. Right? This is just like the proposal by Hess and Fisher. And this also implies that we should change our research focus from mapping musical structures onto emotion percepts, to identifying conditions of the emergence of emotional meanings and experiences. This implies exploring the role of context and using ambiguous musical stimuli, open-ended response formats, qualitative data, and manipulating this contextual information. Thank you very much.
So we wait some seconds or whatever until the end of the transmission is there in Montreal. Can you guys give us a cue when it's finished?
We're clapping now, yeah. So yeah, we'll take that as a signal.
So we start with a question, a local question from here, from La Plata. Yeah.
Hello, good morning. Congratulations on the talk.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit on what you meant by identifying conditions versus mapping the percepts.
Okay. So there's this variability in the phenomenon of emotional contagion with music. Sometimes people perceive an emotion in music and they become infected. For example, they listen to sad music or music that they perceive as expressive of sadness, and they become sad themselves. Sometimes they perceive that the music is sad, but they become happy, or mainly nostalgic, but not really sad, or it just leaves them indifferent, leaves them cool, right? So I think the question is, what are the conditions where all of these possibilities, all of this variability happens? Why in one instance you have contagion, why in another instance you have a different induced emotion, and why sometimes people just don't react emotionally? At least they don't have an induced emotion. And I think the key to explain this variability is to look for the role of context, at least the starting point. So we should start to look for different contexts, just like the past presentation did, or we could somehow manipulate context in the laboratory, for example, asking people to read something, watch a video while listening to music, for example. That's what I meant.
Okay, so we go over to Montreal. Do you have a question there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julian. That was a great talk. I completely agree with the importance of context. And I'm wondering if you think that your bottom-up processes and the top-down processes relate differently to the impacts of context on the experience of music.
If I understand your question, Finn, is definitely the context would impact both, because the context would, for example, impact our bodily tension if just, for example, the environment is very noisy. But what I mean, the emphasis I'm making is that the context would have major impact on musical emotions through the activations of semantic memories. For example, these stereotypes of what the music is about. For example, we start listening to soft, slow piano and violin music, and we say, oh, that's the typical romantic music, so that's when the couple in the movie are going to start kissing, for example, right? So that's what I mean by the context. I mean that, in my view, context has a more significant impact by the activation of this past knowledge about music and the activation of memories from past emotional experiences. These memories may be implicit, by the way.
Do we have another question from here? Yeah.
Solo una mención, ¿podrías volver a poner la parte en la que pones tu trabajo como para profundizar?
So the question is about the review paper, probably, that
okay.
Julian
Right, yeah.
is writing. So in the meantime, I have a question for you, Julian. So I don't know if there's a very now well-known theory in neuroscience that's called predictive coding. I don't know if you have heard of it, but it has to do with, because it's very linked to the way you conceive emotions in music. Basically, it has to do with this idea that we are all the time doing these top-down processes, so we use our contextual memory to make sense of whatever we see, or whatever we hear as well. So I think this theory matches very well with that neuroscientific approach.
Mm-hmm.
And did you have any thoughts regarding, because one way of thinking psychopathology has to do with problems in memory. So with your theory, it would be very interesting to see whether different psychopathologies, which have different contextual memories, interpret music differently.
Probably. I mean, if the knowledge you bring to conceptualize music, that knowledge is at the same time, it's of two types: culturally shared knowledge, so such as these stereotypes I just talked about, and personal knowledge. So if this personal knowledge is somehow different, like traumatic experiences maybe you're thinking of? Yeah.
Or biased in any way? Yeah.
Yeah, so people would react very differently to music, and maybe even in a pathological way, as you say, if one could think about that. If you could use that term to think of an emotional experience with music. Mm.
So do you have any? No, we don't have time for more questions, so we are now switching to the next. Oh, yeah, you have some time, yeah. One more there, from there, yeah.
Hi, I was wondering about circumstances where you might perceive some emotion in music, like sadness, but then feel a different emotion, like compassion. Is there any way to account for the fact that maybe you're perceiving emotions along the kind of basic emotions path, but then you're constructing the emotions that you feel in your mind, so kind of to marry the two theories between perceived and induced emotion?
Yeah, that's more or less what Patrick Jusling proposes in his 2013 paper. The music expresses a basic level of basic emotions, and on top of that you can add other personal or cultural connotations. I think it's more parsimonious to think that regard musical expression as organized on arousal and valence, because it gives you more, it fits better with the evidence, as I said, and it fits better with the cultural variability and personal variability that you observe on people's emotional experiences with music, such as, for example, there's a study by Filippo Bonanni, where he found that gypsy communities sing exactly the same songs in parties and in funerals. And those songs have very different emotional connotations, and they elicit different emotions according to the context. So I think it's more parsimonious to use this model rather than thinking of a basic emotions level and then on top of that other connotations.
Okay, so thank you very much, Julian, and thank you very much, Montreal, for the questions. So we switch to the last talk. Okay, so our last speaker is Maria Benítez, and the talk is titled The Effect of Musical Training on Affective Memory in 4- and 5-year-old Children.
Hello, my name is Maria Benítez, and this is our work. The first years of life are extraordinarily important for all aspects of development. And this is because early experiences have lasting effects. The issue of how musical experiences affect development is a matter of interest that has increased in recent years. Previous research has found that musical training affects development and that human beings are born with a predisposition to perceive and to participate in musical experiences. Musical training stimulates the synaptic plasticity observed in anatomical, functional, and behavioral differences. That is, it has consequences on the anatomical and functional organization of the brain. This shows that there is cerebral plasticity, the product of adaptive processes as a result of environmental stimulation, in this particular case, musical training. The effect that musical training has on other cognitive domains is called transference. This can be near or far as it relates more or less with musical skills. An example of near transfer are children who, being trained in piano, develop greater fine motor skills. When we talk about far transfer, we refer to children who, after musical training, receive benefits in areas such as memory or language, domains that are not directly related to musical skills. These changes are more evident the earlier the training started, and the longer the children are stimulated, the greater the observed changes. So we are going to think of musical training as a modulator of cognitive functions, and particularly today, we are going to focus on memory. Memory is a cognitive function that has a process of codification, consolidation, storage, and recovery. There are several types of memory, an example, semantic memory, episodic memory. We will focus on two of them, the emotional and the neutral memory, through a task based on the International Affective Picture System. Previous research gave an account of the influence of the age when training started and the time of exposure to the stimulus. Now, will there be differences according to the type of training? That's why we have designed two types of training. Receptive training, in which children auditorily perceive musical sound stimuli, and an active training, in which children not only hear sound or musical stimuli, but also will produce music through musical instrument or voice. It is for all these questions that we set ourselves the objective of assessing the effect of an active or receptive musical training during 4 or 10 weeks on emotional and neutral memory in children of 4 and 5 years of age. In the two studies that we are going to present, 180 children participated. They belong to kindergartens of Buenos Aires province in Argentina. In the first study, the children received a receptive or active training for 4 weeks. In the second one, the children received the same types of training, but for a period of 10 weeks. How was the procedure we followed? Once we had the support of the institution that collaborate with the studies, we had a meeting with the children's parents. The procedure that we were going to follow with the children was explained to their parents, and they were shown the picture that the children were going to observe. The parent who agreed voluntarily signed an informed consent, and subsequently, in study 1, these children began with the training. At the end of this training, they were evaluated in their memory through a memory task. The difference with study 2, in addition to the time of exposure to the stimuli, was that in this study, we established a baseline. That is to say that the children were evaluated before and after the training. As we have seen, the memory task was carried out through the International Affective Picture System, which is a conglomerate of pictures with valence and arousal. From this set, 24 suitable images for children were selected, 8 with positive content, 8 with negative content, and 8 neutral. First, the children evaluated their valence through these smileys, and then the emotionality, that is how positive, for example, was a picture, through these little faces. Finally, they were evaluated in their memory, in their immediate and deferred memory. That is how many images the children remember before after having seen them for the first time, and about 7 days later. How were the result of our studies? First of all, we will observe the result of our first study with 4 weeks of exposure to the two types of musical training. And what we see here is the amount of pictures that the children remembered immediately after having seen them for the first time and after having gone through the training. And in this axis, you can see, no. On this axis, we see the type of images observed, neutral, positive, and negative. On this other axis, we see the average number of pictures recalled. In each column are represented the 4 groups: the group of 4 years old with receptive training, the group of 4 years old with active training, the group of 5 years old with receptive training, and the group of 5 years of age with active training. And we are going to focus on the immediate memory of positive images, where the group with 4 years old with active training recalled more images than those who had a receptive training. What happened 7 days after having seen them for the first time? And here we are going to focus on the deferred memory of negative images, where the group of children with 5 years old with active training record more images than the children who receive a receptive training. What happened with the 10 weeks training? And here we see in each graph, each type of images observed neutral, positive, and negative. On this axis, we see the 4 groups represented by the average number of pictures recalled. In each column are represented the average number of pictures recalled after having gone through the training and after it, before and after it. And we are going to focus on the deferred immediate memory of neutral images, where the group with receptive training recalled more images than the children who receive active training. What happened 7 days later? And here we will see that the children who receive a receptive training recalled more neutral images, but the children who receive an active training recalled more images with emotional content. And what are our conclusions? In first place, the active training in comparison with the receptive one generated an improvement in the emotional memory of children who were 4 and 5 years of age. At the same time, 5 years old children performed better than 4 years old ones, and 10 weeks of training were more effective than 4 weeks. And the highest results were observed in the deferred scores. Our most important conclusion is that there is an interaction between a certain types of training and a specific type of memory. This is our team, and thank you so much.
So can you give us a sign of the reception of this talk there in Montreal? Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we're here.
Okay, so that's secure. So do we have any question? First here in La Plata.
The children that participated in the study, they never took music lessons before that, or they did?
¿Contesto en español?
No.
Los nenes, sí, tenían la currícula, están insertos dentro de la currícula de música normal del colegio. Nosotros adaptamos esa currícula a nuestros entrenamientos.
So the children had a musical training in their curriculum, in their schools,
Yep.
and the study adapted that curriculum in a way that matched the procedures.
The active and receptive training.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay, we can switch to Montreal. Do we have a question there in Montreal?
No question here. Oh,
Yeah, we do. We can hear you.
You are measuring visual memory with musical training. Would you expect to have reverse effects with some kind of visual painting training in like recognition of emotions in musical pieces or something? Yeah.
Sería interesante, sí, investigar. Nuestros futuros caminos tienen más que ver con mantener los tipos de entrenamiento y agregar, explorar nuevas funciones cognitivas. Dentro de ellas empezamos a trabajar este año con lenguaje y visoespacialidad.
So the idea of the group is to explore beyond other cognitive functions. You mentioned which were?
¿Cómo?
Linguistic and
Visoespacialidad.
and visuospatial capabilities, but keeping the same two groups of receptive and active training. Yeah.
So I have two questions. The first one is, did the training include any task that asked the kids to identify the emotion in music? Or if so, if not, how do you explain the effect? And second, are the differences that you talked about statistically significant? Did you perform statistical test to see
Sí.
if there was?
Con respecto a los resultados, sí, presentamos los resultados que son estadísticamente significativos. Como se pudo ver, las 4 semanas aparecieron resultados diferentes a las 10 semanas, por eso creemos que existe un efecto en cuanto al tiempo de exposición de los nenes. Y la otra pregunta era acerca de la emoción.
Que si el entrenamiento implicaba que el niño reconociera la emoción en la música.
No estuvo vinculado.
Y si no es así, entonces, ¿cómo explican el efecto?
Una de las explicaciones podría ser que como la música involucra la emoción y dentro de la producción musical podría estar involucrada la emoción, no es algo que es una de las posibles respuestas de por qué un entrenamiento emocional activo produjo una modulación en la memoria del recuerdo emocional y no así el receptivo dentro de las 10 semanas. Podría ser, sí, una de las explicaciones.
So the explanation, if I understood correctly, has to do with that the active training maybe has a more enhanced emotional processing, and that could explain the results, right?
Okay. Maybe.
I wanted to know if you checked whether there were differences in the subject's experience, enjoyment, for instance, of one type of training versus another. So, for instance, there might have been more motivation to learn the materials after an active training.
Claro.
Because, right, for that reason.
¿Me podrías repetir la pregunta, por favor?
Bueno, tratar de hacerlo.
Yo lo que estaba preguntando es si en realidad en el activo lo que tenés en los nenes está en realidad disfrutándolo más, están más motivados y por eso crecer esta emoción en la memoria.
Y que si mediste esto.
Esto no lo medimos, no está medido. Podría llegar a ser, sí, una de las explicaciones, como le contestamos a él, pero no lo medimos.
So there was not a measure of how engaged were the children in these different trainings, because the question was about how could this engagement in the active variation could have explained also the results. Okay.
However, in the receptive training, you also have an effect. So in the neutral images, you have an effect with receptive training immediately and also deferred. So there, it's not the same explanation for it.
So there was an additional comment regarding that during the receptive training you found a difference with the neutral images, right?
Yes.
And so I have a question regarding that. So how would you explain that the active training has... Oh, no, I think I can't. Okay. Okay. So how can you explain that the active training has this effect on the non-neutral images, but the receptive training has an effect on the neutral images? Which is weird for me, because also I would expect more to people in general to recall emotional images but not neutral images. So is there any explanation that you found regarding this?
No, la verdad es que no esperábamos los resultados. Cuando aparecieron las imágenes, un resultado estadísticamente significativo a las 10 semanas, fue algo que no esperábamos, que module el recuerdo neutro, digamos, el entrenamiento receptivo. Las posibles explicaciones están vinculadas con el entrenamiento activo, que tienen que ver con esto que comentaban los colegas, pero hay que seguir indagando.
Okay. So yeah, so the answer was related to the fact that this finding with the neutral images was sort of surprise, so that could be further investigated. Okay, so I think we are done. Yeah, we need to switch. So, okay, so thank you very much, Montreal, and we switch to the next talks.
Para allá, para acá. So if you want, people, you can follow the talking in the global foyer. And we have half an hour for doing that. Thank you.